So I created playlists that kind of are geared towards the mood that I want to channel. So I actually have like a list that's called Feel Fantastical.
Power to Live More with Joe Dodds.
Welcome to the Power to Live More podcast, all about productivity, organisation, well-being, energy and resilience. I'm Jo Dodds, and I started this show to enable interesting people to share their stories about how they use their power to live more, and by that I mean to do the stuff that they want to do more than the stuff that they need to or should do. It's about creating a life for yourself where you have the energy, health and space to be happy and fulfilled, spending your time as you'd like, whether that be at work, home or somewhere else entirely. That's your choice.
Hello. My name is Ellie Dodds and I'm co-presenter, and today Joe is interviewing Olga Kirshenbaum. Olga was introduced to us by Amber Christian from show number 138. Olga is a published author of Shmoney Guide, Making Money Choices Doesn't Need to Be So Scary, focusing on personal finance advice. Olga is a money whisperer and founder of Rags to Riches Consulting. Olga empowers individuals and creative leaders to make money choices with confidence so they can unleash life's full potential. Back to the studio.
Today I'm interviewing Olga Kirshenbaum of Rags to Riches Consulting. Welcome, Olga. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
So start by telling us who you are, what you do and where you do it.
Sure. So I am a money coach. I help individuals and creative leaders and creative business owners to get comfortable with the money in their lives and their businesses so they can focus on really what matters. I'm based out of New York City, but I work remotely with people all over the globe.
Lovely. And again, you're one of my podcast guests who I'm sure didn't grow up saying you wanted to be a money coach. Tell us the story. How did you get here?
So I was one of the few people when I was in high school, I really knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be an accountant. Strange, I know. At the time, I thought I really love math, and you're counting money, you're analyzing stuff. I figured there'd be tons of math in that. That is not true. But I did find it really interesting. It's a lot of puzzle solving. And when I started undergrad, I went to full on with my accounting degree. I found it so interesting. And then I spent about 10 years working corporate, and I worked at a public firm for a couple of years. And I loved it. But at the same time, I wasn't fulfilled. And February 2018, I was let go from my last full-time job. And it was also my first time being fired. So it was an experience in itself. And I knew that part of the reason why this happened was because I kept running away from jobs that I knew I didn't want something there, but I didn't know what I wanted. And it was a pattern of maybe the last 3 jobs where it's just like running away from places. And I decided that this time around, I was going to really think about what I wanted to do and what I wanted out of my work life. And it took me a while to get here. At first, you won't believe, I started off thinking I would start a flower shop. But then I did some research and realized that I was just not in a position to do it the right way at the time. So I was like, what can I do that I have the skills to do right now and maybe get to the point where I will have that flower shop, I don't know, 5-10 years down the line. And a lot of my friends and family knew that I was kind of on this soul searching journey, and they kept saying, Olga, you're always giving money advice. People would pay for that. And at first I said to myself, oh, place, who would pay for it. But then I realized that I was also taking for granted that I was doing this kind of since I was in high school. I remember one of my friends that I graduated from high school. She came up to me and said, "Hey, can we have a chat about budgeting? How do you spend money throughout the year?" Basically, she had a job that was going to be full-time in the summer, part-time during the school year. And she wanted to make sure she didn't have to worry about picking up extra shifts and still have, money to do things that she could enjoy outside of just worrying about the day-to-day stuff. So I gave her some tips and we talked about her goals. And 5 years later, she asks me if we could have another chat. I said, sure, why not? And she says, I used this advice that you gave me. It was great. I actually ended up saving the entirety of my student loans. And what do I do? Do I pay it off the day after I graduate, or do I do a payment plan? And I said to her, how many of our friends would love to say that they paid off their student loans the day after they graduated? Go for it. You're going to start your new life fresh. And when I started realizing I've been doing this kind of help for more than 10 years, more than I was an accountant, I kind of decided to give it a go.
Wow. So are you still going to go back to the flowers, do you think?
I actually do think I am still putting it out into the universe that is a thing that I want. I actually consider myself a plant mama. I have easily 20 plants in my house. People come to me for plant advice also. And I recently met someone who actually, her family owns a flower shop. So it keeps coming up in my life. So I think it's going to happen down the road sometime in the future.
So tell us a bit more about the types of people that you work with and how you work with them.
Sure. So I like to kind of divvy it up into two groups. I work with regular people who are living paycheck to paycheck, but they know on paper they are making enough money. So right now, people are getting ready to file their taxes and they are getting their tax forms. And I get so many questions from people saying, I really make this much. Where's my money going? And I really help people figure out where their priorities are and how can they make the most of their money, meeting the goals that they want, but also not feeling like, they're compromising everything in their life and they have to give up all the good stuff that they enjoy. So that's really on the individual side. I do one-on-one coaching, and I also do a money mastermind called the Shmoney Academy. It's basically an 8-week program where 4 to 5 individuals sit down. It's remote. We get on a call once a week and we discuss different money topics. It really helps people build that confidence. And I found, regardless of what the goals are for each person, the key thing that they all walk away with is confidence to know that they got this money thing. That for me is probably the most rewarding thing to see. And then I also work with it's a mix of entrepreneurs. Sometimes it's freelancers, people who are starting their own businesses, but they're really creative. So a lot of artists, a lot of people who have told themselves money is not my language and numbers are not my thing. The reality is, if you don't understand the money side of business, especially your business, it's going to impact you down the road. I have seen too many people start a business, put the money side of things on the back burner, and then 10 years later, it's not just their business falling apart, it's their family relationships, it's their relationships with their significant others. So I really help them figure out what's important, because there's so many things and people give so much advice out there. How do you know what pertains to you? So I kind of help them figure out what is important for you in your business and how do you take care of that side of the business without it making you feel like you have to become an accountant, and without it taking up too much time.
Are there sort of common money sort of issues with people? Let's think sort of individuals aside from business to begin with. Are there, I don't know, top 3 reasons that people don't hang on to their money in your experience?
Yes. So I think the first thing really boils down to having a budget. In America, only 40% of people actually use a budget, and only 40% of people actually have $1,000 in their savings to cover an emergency. And I don't think, correlation means causation, but I don't think it's a coincidence. A lot of people don't use a budget because they feel like living on a budget means that you have to take away from your existing lifestyle, that you have to compromise on things that you love, and that you have to live lesser than what you already do. And it's a huge misconception. So I think these two beliefs, one fuels the other, and people are kind of scared to look at that side of things because it's kind of looking yourself in the mirror and saying, hey, this is where I'm at. And that may mean facing some poor choices you've made in the past. And I totally get that. But the reality is that that picture allows you to see where you're going. So what I like to tell my clients is think of your budget as your compass and your money goals as your map. Your goals are exactly where you want to be in the next, I don't know, it could be 6 months, a year, 5 years. And the budget just tells you where you are today. And knowing where you are today, you can pivot and figure out what you need to focus on to get you to those goals. And the third thing I would say, it's something a lot of us grow up with, and I call it money talk stigma. It's this idea that talking about money is rude, it's impolite, we shouldn't talk about it with anyone. I've talked to people who are, much older. They have teenage kids themselves by this point, and they realize that they've never had a money conversation with their parents all their lives. And I believe that not having money conversations actually leaves us without the tools, not just to have those conversations when we have an issue or a matter we want to learn more about. It also leaves us without the tools to look for solutions. So I'd say those are the top 3 common trends that I'm seeing right now.
It's really interesting, and it's so true that people don't talk about money. I have 2 really close friends, and we do talk about money, and it certainly helped me over the sort of last 5 or 6 years that I've known them both to be open, which is not something, as you say, that most people are in sort of financial terms. So I completely get that. Talk about the sort of you said that budgeting, there's a myth that it sort of restrains you, but sort of that was my word for it, not yours, but that is sort of what it's supposed to do, isn't it? But are you saying that people sort of overemphasize that, and then that's why they don't do it, and actually if they do it, they'd see it had a different impact? How would you sort of further develop that?
Absolutely. So when we start something new, we are always, it's scary, especially if you've never used a budget before. And I have noticed that we are really good at telling really scary stories to ourselves, especially in the beginning. And a lot of us don't like change. So we tell ourselves, if I start budgeting, that means it's almost like how people say adulting. It's hard and I don't want to do it, but it's kind of like a negative story we're telling ourselves that you have to take away. The reality is, yes, the first couple of months may be a little bit uncomfortable because you're finding your sweet spot. You will have to make some changes, but one thing, it doesn't all have to be in one go. So, for example, you can say, this month I'm just going to put it together and see where I'm at. And that doesn't mean tomorrow you're going to rebuild your entire spending habits. If anything, I'd say don't do that. That sets you up for failure. Drastic changes tend to never stick. It's almost like putting yourself on a money diet. If you have ever been on a diet, those 30 days, 28-day diets, typically they're really hardcore. They make you, you have to be really strict with yourself. And most people who go through this experience, they will probably, towards the end, dream about that thing that they love eating so much that it doesn't really teach them the good habits. So when people do the same thing with a budget, they just implement everything first day, it kind of doesn't teach them anything about the good habits that they need to sustain that budget. So it takes some time in the beginning to figure out, maybe for the first month you want to work on your savings. Do you have any room to add any savings? What about your costs? Maybe there are some ways to cut costs. When I talk to my individual clients, we talk a lot about ways that people sometimes take for granted that you can lower your bills. For example, if you've been with a cell phone carrier for 5 years, I am pretty sure you can call them up and say, like, hey, is there anything available? Maybe there's a promotion going on for loyal customers. There's always something going on. I realized this trend amongst my friends who would go to a store because their cell phone was just this broken. And it was partly because they haven't been to the store in so long. They're like, oh, my phone works. And then eventually they go and they're like, you've been a customer for so long. Here's a free phone, or here's money back. Your monthly bill's going to be less. And the other thing I also talk to my clients about is mindful spending. See, a budget actually allows you to make mindful spending choices. Now, we had a participant in the Shmoney Academy. Her thing was things she buys for beauty. So skin creams, perfumes, things like that. It makes her feel good. And she knew that it's also kind of part of her spending issue, if, for lack of a better word, we'll call it an issue for now. And once she built that budget, she realized, first off, it actually made her see she was better off than she was. So it wasn't so scary once she put it together and she's like, I'm actually better off and I can get on track with my goals way sooner than I can. 3 weeks into the program, once we got to the mindful spending portion, she actually came in with an example that she was able to use before we even had our call. She went to a store. She saw one of those creams that she loves so much, $80. And she said to herself, what am I doing? I have an entire drawer that is full of creams. I don't need this one right now. And she walked out of the store. And the most important thing for me was, and I asked her, did you feel like you were taking away from yourself? And she said, no, I felt very good about my choice. And that's really, I think that's where the misconception lies. She didn't buy that thing that makes her happy, but it's also because her priorities have shifted now. And that's where the true power of a budget is. It really shows you the full picture of what's happening. And then when you do make that mindful spending choice that is good for your wallet, it doesn't actually feel that bad.
It reminds me a bit of the whole thing around productivity and planning your time, because prioritizing is a big part of budgeting from what you've just said, and it is for your time as well, isn't it? That we've all got limited amounts of money and limited amounts of time, and it's about choosing what's most important to us to either spend our money or our time on, rather than just letting it all sort of happen around us and sort of squandering it, I guess.
Absolutely. I actually love that comparison. I am a huge organizer with my schedule. I have my own podcast. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. And if you're not organized, it's going to be very difficult. It's the same thing with a budget, really. And it's funny because I think another common trend there between the two is what works for me may not work for you.
Yes.
We'll have different priorities. We'll have different projects that we're working on. But the key is to be organized and also to know what your priorities are. For example, when it comes to the money side of business for my business, I know what my top 3 priorities are for the first 6 months of the year. Knowing that those are my priorities, it makes sure that I know where my attention is going. And if it's not in line with that, I know that I have ways to check myself. And that's kind of the same thing with a budget. You create a budget for a month. And I tell people it's good to check in with your budget halfway through. That way you know where you're going. So it's like that checkpoint to see how you're doing. And it's not, a lot of people have a budget and then they won't check in with it until the month is over. And it's like, oh, that was horrible. It's like, well, if you checked in halfway through, you would see, oh, maybe I have been spending too much on entertainment. Let me pivot. Or maybe I've been eating out more than I would like. Let me pivot and maybe cook more for the rest of the month. So I really love that comparison between organizing and budgeting. It's a very good point.
I've also been reflecting as you've been talking about when you're out and about with friends, and perhaps it's about going for a drink or going for a meal or whatever, there's quite a lot of peer pressure to spend that money, if we use those examples. And, as in, they don't, make you spend the money, but if it's like, oh, do you fancy this? You sort of go, yes. And to say I can't afford it is quite negative, and you can see why people wouldn't do that. But actually to say I haven't budgeted for that, so I can't, or I'm not going to, is actually quite a different response, isn't it?
Absolutely. I also love that you brought this up because, because so many of us grew up with money talk stigma, in my eyes, there's nothing wrong to say, that's out of my budget right now. But there is a lot of the societal shame around, oh, well, you don't have money. But if you were to say that's not a priority for me right now in different language, but it's kind of the same thing with organizing your time, for example. I'm sure you get approached with a lot of opportunities that, just don't fit what you're working on right now. And the answer really is, that's not a priority for me. And if you figure out a way to kind of say the same thing in a polite way to your friends, I think that if they're really your friends, you wouldn't feel that peer pressure. So I actually had someone write into my Dear Olga column saying, sometimes I feel a lot of peer pressure to go out to lunch with my coworkers because no one really eats inside at the office. And when it's funny because I post these online so other people can learn, a lot of the people in the comments were saying like, oh, don't let people pressure you. And it's so easy to say that, but we also don't like to be singled out. We like to be part of a group. That's part of the human experience. But the reality is, first of all, anyone who's your friend will support you no matter what. My honest take is if someone's really pressuring you that much, maybe you should reassess that relationship, because anyone that I have in my life, for example, they understand what my priorities are and they respect that. It's kind of like respecting boundaries. But I would say my personal way dealing with that when it comes to budgeting, I tend to be aggressive when I plan for things. So I will overestimate because we have a tendency. So I think you'll appreciate this. Just like with time, we underestimate how much money things will take. So we have a tendency of saying like, oh yeah, that's going to take an hour, but it's going to take way longer. Same thing with money. So knowing that we have this tendency of saying like, oh, that's going to be $100, I'll always add a little bit of padding so that if something like this does come up, I have a little bit more wiggle room.
Yeah. The other thing that I was thinking, because I've just been doing a bit of reorganizing of subscriptions and the like in my business, is that we can sort of have two things going on. That we're aware that we're perhaps sort of juggling money for whatever reasons, but we're not aware that we're actually spending money that we needn't be spending, because we sort of get locked into things and then never go back and review them. For example, I use Zoom to record these calls now. I was using GoToMeeting, but I also had a Zoom account for other reasons. And it just dawned on me that actually I just needed one account, which was going to be one cost rather than the two. And I told myself for months that the quality of sound on GoToMeeting was really good and I didn't want to change it and all that sort of thing. And actually that really was a bit of a excuse for not sorting it out. And to sort it out, I had to switch, my guests onto here that had already booked onto GoToMeeting. I had to change my automated process and, all that sort of stuff. And when I had time to do it, I actually did it, as you know, because I sent you a new link for today.
Right.
Actually, I cancelled my GoToMeeting account this week, which is £30 a month nearly. That has gone away now, but it took concerted time and effort to get to the stage where I could do that. And I think sometimes we just sort of feel powerless because we don't feel like we can actually approach it. And it's the same with productivity and time management. Jobs seem too big and complicated, so we don't deal with them and we end up taking the long route round because that's the only way to do it. But actually there's a much slicker route, but to do that we've got to spend half a day getting it sorted, sort of thing. So a lot of this comes back to a concept I talk about a lot on the podcast, which is about being intentional, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think that it's all about intention, to be honest. It's one of those things, I think, when you're organizing and doing productivity, you kind of have to check in with yourself, especially for you. I'm sure every couple of months things change and you kind of need to adjust and make sure that you're focusing on the right things. And it's kind of the same thing with budgets. It's really important to check in with yourself. I like to say every quarter, but some people don't have that many things going on, so they're okay with doing it every 6 months or so. But these subscriptions that you mentioned are super sneaky. They are small enough that you don't notice them, but when you have 3 or 4 adding up every month that you don't use, they really begin to add up. So I actually tell people I work with kind of the same thing that I do with my schedule. I tell them, check in with your statement once every 3 months or so and see, maybe there's things that have been going on there that you don't notice. Maybe you don't use Spotify, but you're still being charged the $9.99 for it. Maybe it's that Hulu subscription. Maybe you have overlapping tools like Zoom or GoToMeetings. But I I know how daunting it can be to kind of go through that process. And I kind of mentioned this, when, especially if you haven't used a budget before and you start and now you need to figure out your steps. I call it a transition period because if you started to overhaul everything today, you may not even finish your budget today because that's how overwhelming it's going to be. There's going to be so many moving parts, so many moving pieces that probably are going to quit. I would. So I would say focus on one thing. So if, for example, you do have subscriptions out there, take some time this month just to focus on subscriptions. Instead of focusing on all of your expenses, think about maybe just subscriptions. The next month, maybe you can focus on doing just the utilities and companies you've worked with for a prolonged period of time. See if there's anything that you can do about lowering your rates. The added benefit of contacting vendors you work with already about lowering your rates is it also helps you work on your negotiating skills and just going out there and asking people for stuff for you. I've read a study from, I think, the 80s. This guy was a psychologist or in a college. His mom came home. They lived in New York City. She came home one day and said, people are so rude on the train. I am standing there the whole way and not one person offered me a seat. And he says to his mom, well, did you ask anybody? And she said, no, but they should know better. And it's just typical New Yorkers. They're so rude. So he was teaching a course, and he basically had his students go do the study of going on the train and asking people for a seat. And the surprising outcome of this study was it wasn't whether New Yorkers are rude or not, whether people give up their seat. It's how asking for that seat impacted the people asking. And it's really eye-opening on how difficult it is for us to ask for things. So people got interviewed who were part of this study, I think 20, 25 years after it took place. And some of them say, anytime I think about that experience, I start sweating, I get anxious, and it's just that scary to ask people for things for us. So I would just say go out there and practice on your vendors.
Good piece of advice. So you've talked about being organised yourself in terms of your time. So moving on from the money, tell us a bit more about how you do that and perhaps what tools and apps you might use.
Absolutely. I am always on a search for good tools. I have my calendar blocked. So, and I actually don't remember where I picked up this productivity tip, but since I've been using it, I found a lot of people do it as well. So on Mondays and Fridays, my calendar isn't open for bookings. I mean, I will sometimes have a client session and I do have calls on Mondays and Fridays, but it's really kind of my admin time. So I use it on Mondays, it's to like ramp up for the week. On Fridays, it's to kind of wind down and make sure that I know what's going on next week and kind of plan ahead. I make sure that I make time for my podcast. I have padding between schedules so that, I never have on my calendar that I have like back-to-back calls. I just found that sets you up for running around like a chicken with its head cut off. Another tool that I've been using a lot is a tool called Bella. It is basically a to-do list app that feeds into your Gmail calendar. I'm not sure if they do integration with any other calendars, but I feel like they should. But I'm a huge to-do list person. I will write all the things that I need to do. That's how I break down a lot of the projects that I work on. I kind of create sort of milestones that need to be met to make sure this gets accomplished. And, that satisfying feeling of crossing it off or checking it off. Bella really replicates that well. And because it feeds into my calendar, I'm able to go and take notes. So let's say this call was a session, or maybe we're talking about working together. I'm able to go take notes in the tool. And then if at any point I'm saying something like, oh, I'll get back to you on this, or I'll send you a link to, I can make those notes and automatically create them as to-do list tasks.
Right.
And then schedule them for when they get done. So I would say Bella has been a lifesaver. It's one of the best tools I've ever invested in. And then I also found one more tool just the other day from a podcast guest. It's called Streak. It's a CRM tool that also fits into Gmail, and it has allowed me to really streamline my pipeline. I don't have to, for example, with podcast guests, I'm able to track where I'm at with everybody. Once I have them either confirm or we already record, I'm able to move them down and prioritize on what's really important. So I would say that's how I've been staying productive the last 6 months.
Lovely. And Bella, if I'm not mistaken, was or is Amber Christian's platform, who was on show number 138. And
yes.
That's how you came to be here as well. I think she recommended you coming on here. If people want to know more about Bella, they can go to powertolivemore.com/138 and they'll be able to hear more about it from Amber herself. So brilliant. So how you keep yourself fit and energized and well to run your business? You sound really organized and really structured. Do you do the same in terms of your wellness?
I do.
Why am I not surprised?
I actually have a 2-hour morning routine, and it, again, it's one of those things. I didn't just wake up one day and I was like, I'm going to do 2 hours every morning for myself. It was an evolving work in progress for, I would say, a good 5 to 6 months. And it started with me getting into daily meditation, really. I knew that I wanted to meditate more consistently because I've seen the benefits and, felt them myself. And a lot of the very successful entrepreneurs that I admire always talk about how much benefits they've gotten from meditating. So I incorporated that, and I really started to feel different in the sense where I don't think it was so much like, there are benefits of meditation, of course, but when it came to focusing on me first thing in the day, being able to say, like, maybe today was a bad day, didn't go as planned, but at least I got this thing checked off, really helped set the right tone for the day. And even if it was frustrating or just didn't go my way, or just one of those days where it's almost like every single thing goes wrong, I'm still able to kind of feel good about it. So since I started this, now it's evolved into, I just spend 2 hours in the mornings. I meditate, I do a little bit of yoga, I journal, and I read. Reading ended up being one of those things that I was constantly trying to make time for it during my workday. I was like, you know what? Let me put like half hour break between busy moments in my day. So it's like kind of coming back to me, and I just always skip it. So I was like, you know what? Let's put a part of your morning routine, and I bet it will get done. And guess what? It does.
Yeah, sure enough. Yes, yeah. It's interesting. I keep thinking I love reading, and that's one of my sort of live more things. But I tend to read before I go to sleep, and I don't want to read business books before I go to sleep. I want to read, novels. And I've been trying to think about shifting things around on that basis, i.e., that I will read business books before I go to sleep, so that I can, because I will read the novels anyway, because I'll just pick the book up and do it. Whereas actually creating a routine where I do the business reading that I want to do, but I don't sort of naturally do the same way as I do the fiction, is one of my focuses at the moment. I did contemplate using my treadmill to read my fiction books on the basis that I really want to do that. So having connected the two things together would make it a lot easier to sort of find the time to do that. But I'm, not at home. I'm actually doing proper walking now, and I can't read my book while I'm doing that because I'd probably trip over.
Right. I do have a tool that you may find useful. It's called Blinkist. It's
Yes.
I kind of use it to it's basically scribed notes of nonfiction books that you can read or listen to the audio. I kind of use it, especially since I started coaching and kind of networking. I get a lot of recommendations for books, and I find it nothing more frustrating getting this book recommendation, being so excited for it, and it ends up being awful or just like not for me. So
Yeah.
I use Blinkist to kind of filter books that I want to read. So I'll listen to all the blinks, and if it's really insightful, I will go and read the full book. But
Also, yeah.
I'll even sometimes get kind of something will stick with me, and I'll carry it around, and it'll still impact my life. And of course, it's not the same thing as reading a book, but I feel like it helped me step up my learning game.
Yes. Yeah. That's a really good tip. Any more tips for learning and improving?
I would say my biggest tip would be anything that you hear and something part of you starts judging it. I'd say work on taking that away, part of your mindset. And once you release those limitations, your learning will really step up to a new level. It's almost like I've come to a point where I'm like, I know what I know, but I don't know anything that I don't know. So if I just am constantly rooted in what I do know, I'm probably just going to cap my learning. So I tend to listen to a lot of people like that I don't necessarily agree with. I may not see eye to eye on every point, but I still try to listen to their reasoning and how they got there, because sometimes I find that you still learn from people that you don't agree with, but having that different point of view gets you and your mind going in a different direction that you may not even have expected. For
Yeah.
example, I before I started doing a lot of the mindset work that I do with money, I would just help people, just do the budgets, figure out what they need to do. And I got on a call with someone who was a finance person, and I was already making judgments before we got on this call. I was like, this is probably going to be boring. It's a finance guy. Whenever I typically get on a call with a finance person, they try to upsell me to try and like trap my clients in situations, and it's just never pleasant. So I was not looking forward to this call. And as we are talking, it was a 30-minute intro call. I'm listening to his points of view. And I even told him halfway through the conversation, I said, "You are one of the most open minded finance people that I've ever met." And he ended up telling me about a lot of this energy, money, mindset work that I never even knew about. And it has literally transformed my work. It's transformed how I work with my clients, and it actually transformed me. It helped me help myself, and now I'm able to help my clients in the same way. But had I just been like, oh, another finance person, I'm not going to get on that call, who knows where I would be today. And that's only 6 months ago.
Yeah, that's such a great example, as you say, of sort of keeping that open-mindedness to other points of view and just to opportunities and people, and seeing, what happens as a result. Lovely, thank you for that. So last couple of questions. Firstly, what about those days where it all goes horribly wrong and it's not been a great day? How do you deal with that?
I listen to a lot of music. So I picked up a tip from someone who said, whenever you have some sort of presentation or something you're nervous about, create a get pumped playlist. Don't make it too long, 5 songs, maybe 20 minutes. And I was doing this before I would go to networking events, before I had to be really on for something. And I noticed the benefit of that. So I created playlists that kind of are geared towards the mood that I want to channel. So I actually have like a list that's called Feel Fantastical, and I go to it. I share it with my clients, with my friends, just because, sometimes we can't help it. No matter what kind of mindset you're in, you could be super positive and, all about abundance in your life, but we're still human and things still happen. And if you really want to boost that mood up, I go to that playlist.
I love that. Reminds me, years ago I went to a job interview, and I remember playing a particular, at the time it wasn't a playlist, it was a tape
Yeah.
of all the songs that I'd put together that gave me confidence, and I just sang all the way to my interview so that I had loads of confidence during the interview. So I don't really do that as much now, thinking about it. If I looked on my playlists, they're not about necessarily sort of motivating in the moment sort of thing. So thanks for that tip. I think I will go and make myself a playlist later.
I love that.
Those days where you get to live more, and that's where I talk about getting to do more of the things that you want to do and less of the stuff that you don't want to do. What do those days look like for you?
So that's a funny question. Funny in the timing sense, because I have been reworking my schedule the last couple of weeks just to try to figure out, again, like what are my priorities, how I want to focus, how I want to show up for the next 6 months. And one of those things is incorporating a fun day. I have been reading a lot about companies that will do the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the time you're working on all your, day-to-day stuff, and then 20% will be spent on something that you find exciting. And, just for fun, or maybe it's to send thank you notes. So I actually set a day. One of those days is now going to be Friday. It's kind of my day to focus on whatever I want, like something that I'm developing, maybe for my business, maybe my other hobbies, but it's kind of focused on that instead of just like the day-to-day stuff that needs to get done.
So it's Friday tomorrow. What are you going to do?
Yeah, so I'm actually working on, so I have what I like to call novelty syndrome. And if you're working for yourself, it can be quite dangerous. Basically, I want to create all the new services and all the new things for my clients, but you have to pace yourself. And at first I told myself I wasn't going to create anything new, but this one thing has been calling me for the last 2 weeks, and I feel like it's my duty to go through with it. So that's kind of actually why I came up with this strategy, because I can't stop thinking about it. I think that it's going to be a great thing for my clients and anyone who wants to build that confidence with money in their life or their business. So I think you can hear how excited I am just talking about it. So I was like, I have to make time for it. And I have been thinking about incorporating a fun day into my schedule anyway. So I was like, why not? Let's give this a go for a couple of weeks.
Lovely. Excellent. Well, have an amazing day tomorrow. And let everyone know how they can get in contact with you and find out more about what you do.
Absolutely. So the two best places to find me is my website, which is ragstorichesconsulting.com. And I am also all over LinkedIn. That is probably right now my go-to social platform.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you so much for your interview today, Olga. It's been great talking to you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jo. Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
I'm off to check out some of my subscriptions now.
Yes.
All this information is available in the show notes. If you go to powertolivemore.com / in this case 155, then you'll find them there. This week I just want to talk to you about podcasting. It's something that I've been doing for 7.5 years now. I host another podcast with Engage for Success as well as this one. I spoke to someone today who was interested in finding out more about how to get started in podcasting, and she's starting to think about that as much as anything else because of the lockdown situation, the fact that she's not able to do what she would normally do. It's started her thinking about other ways that she can connect with her clients, and she was interested in finding out more about how you get started with podcasting. And she said to begin with that she has sort of procrastinated on doing anything about it because the podcasts that she's participated in have been quite sophisticated affairs where she's gone to people's studios and they've had all the sort of particular microphones and they've had a editing crew and producers and all that sort of thing. So it had really daunted her and stopped her actually thinking about starting her own podcast. And we talked about the fact that actually when you get started, you can just simply use something like Zoom or GoToMeeting or other means like Skype or whatever to record your podcast. And in terms of the sort of content, if you decide that you're going to interview people, then that can be quite a quick way of getting set up, because obviously those people bring their own topic and knowledge to the table and you're not having to create the whole content for the show on your own. There are loads of ways that you can host the podcast online. So I use Blueberry to host mine, but you can also use something like Libsyn or SoundCloud. And most of the places that enable you to publish your podcast will then send your feed across to Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all the other various places where people can download podcasts. So if you're thinking that you might be interested in launching a podcast, now might be a good time to do something about it. Obviously, you're in a position where you're likely to be working at home, and likely most of your guests are too, and they may well be a bit more available than usual. So if you've been thinking about starting a podcast, there may be no better time than the present to give it a go. And if it's something that you would like some help with, then it's one of the things that I help my members with in the Power to Live More Calm community. So if you're interested in finding out a bit more about that, if you'd like to go to
powertolivemore.com/get calm. You can read what that involves there, or if you want to just have a chat with me, then drop me an email at joe@powertolivemore.com. And just to say, I think one of the best ways to get inspired to create your own podcast is to become a listener of other people's. Clearly, you're listening to mine now, so that's a good start. Some of the other podcasts that I like to listen to are Desert Island Discs. If you're interested in leadership and organisations, then Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat is a good one. I've been enjoying listening to the Feel Better, Live More podcast with Dr. Chatterjee, which always makes me laugh because obviously the title includes Live More, which is in my podcast title too. And one I've really enjoyed listening to in the last few months, they're just coming to the end of their first series, and that's the How Did We Get Here podcast with Claudia Winkleman and Professor Tanya Byron, and that's where they're talking to people who have various struggles in their life, and they're helping them to think through some strategies and things that they can do to get a better outcome for them in their lives. And some of the people they talk to have just got some real challenging issues, and the way that they work through those with them is just astounding. I just really enjoy listening to them, so that's a definite recommend from me. So as I say, the first thing to do if you're interested in podcasting is to listen to some, and then start to think about how you might be able to create your own yourself. And if you're interested in getting some help with that, as I say, please do go to powertolivemore.com/get calm, or drop me a line at joe@powertolivemore.com. And the show notes again are at powertolivemore.com/155, and we look forward to speaking to you next week.
Use your power to live more.